Welcome everyone to the webinar today. I'm Scott Cofoid. I'm a technical coordinator with the CRS program. I'm responsible for the Central Review program that reviews ECs and recertifications for all CRS communities. And this webinar is going to explain the changes to the Class 9 prerequisites and the Activity 310, particularly as they apply to elevation certificates in the upcoming 2021 CRS Coordinators Manual Addendum. So throughout the webinar, I'll discuss the changes to the Class 9 prerequisite as they relate to ECs, the changes in Activity 310, paying close attention to both the scoring and the review changes that are being made. I'll describe what this means for all the parties involved, from you as the community to ISO as the reviewers and to FEMA and CRS program as a whole. I'll then show you how we're transitioning to this new system. And then lastly, how you should be preparing yourself for this change come January 1. 99% of the time when I refer to ECs throughout the webinar today, I'm generally referring to all certificates that are required with ECs, like floodproofing certificates, the V-zone certificates, engineered opening certificates. You know, we in the floodplain management world are just so used to referring to ECs all the time, and really assuming that when we say EC, we really mean EC and all required certificates. So please remember that I'm probably almost every time referring to all of those certificates when I say the term EC. All right, the most important change is the Class 9 prerequisite, right? That keeps you in the program. It's got to be a Class 9. So currently the Class 9 prerequisite says you must maintain ECs on all new construction and substantial improvement, substantial damage in the floodplain. This will continue under the 2021 addendum. That won't change. Next, the current manual requires 90% accuracy for your ECs. Again, this will remain the same standard under the 2021 addendum. However, under the 2021 addendum, you must have written procedures that go into more depth on how you will require, collect, correct, maintain, and make ECs and all those required certificates available to the public. So that part is what's new. So let's take a look at what's going to be required with those written construction certificate management procedures. Think about your building permit system and how ECs and all required certificates fit into it. The first thing you'll need to identify are what certificates are required. You'll want to consider all those certificates that are required under the NFIP, your floodproofing, your V-zone, and your engineered opening certificates. And this is specifically why we name this element construction certificate management procedures instead of EC management procedures, because it's really a process where you have to look at all those certificates that you may require during permitting. You'll want to identify when these certificates are required in your permitting process. Some communities require certificates before, during, and after construction, while others just require the finished construction ECs. It doesn't really matter when you require them, but at a minimum, and for CRS purposes, a finished construction EC must be required, reviewed, and maintained for all insurable structures in your floodplain. So next, you'll want to identify what department or office collects the certificates and what department or office reviews them. You'll also want to identify the exact staff doing the reviewing of those ECs. You'll need to know how you're going to correct your certificates. For instance, when the floodplain manager can correct the form, or when it needs to be returned to the surveyor for him or her to correct the form. And lastly, your procedures must describe how and where your certificates are maintained and how you're going to make them available to the public. We will have a template ready soon that you can follow to help you write these procedures specifically for your community. We will let everyone know. We will notify everyone probably through our newsletter and maybe even an email blast, but always check on our website from time to time. We'll have that template ready for everyone to kind of follow along, give you an idea, give you a head start on how to write those procedures. Also, if you happen to require ECs and other certificates for construction outside your floodplain, in your regulatory floodplain, you'll want to make sure you consider that when you write up your procedures. Make sure to include those as well. All right, now let's talk about the changes to Activity 310. Currently, there are 3 elements for credit in Activity 310, EC, ECPO, and ECPR. ECPO is for having ECs on buildings, on post-firm buildings, and ECPR is for having ECs for pre-firm buildings. But starting January 1, 2021, we'll still have the ECPO and ECPR elements. Those are not changing. There's nothing happening there. But we will be including the CCMP, that Construction Certificate Management Procedures. That's what's going to get scored instead of ECs. ECs will no longer be reviewed for scoring for points in CRS. As you'll hear me talk pretty soon, they'll be reviewed for just your Class 9 prerequisite of staying in the program and achieving the 90%. All right, so currently ECs are scored based on review at the time of cycle, based on the percentage that are correct during your first review. Starting January 1 next year, the community going through a cycle verification will no longer have their score for element EC in Activity 310 scored based on the correctness of their ECs. So ECs won't be used for scoring anymore. It'll strictly be based on your Construction Certificate Management Procedures. And that score for a participating community will always be 38 points, which means you're going to get a score of either 0 or 38 points. If you have the procedures, you get the 38 points. If you don't have the procedures, you have 0, and it is a Class 9 prerequisite, so you will be removed from the program if you don't have these procedures. So in essence, it's kind of simple. You write the procedures, you have them in place, and you automatically get 38 points. It's kind of better than what it's been now, where your ECs were scored based on the percentage of them that were correct. So a lot of communities got less than 38 points. Now everyone's going to be getting those 38 points. Besides the scoring changes we have in Activity 310, we'll also be changing the way we do EC reviews. So currently, we review ECs at both your cycle and recertification time. So here I'm going to go over our current review process. However, there's some changes, right, between the way we do these reviews at cycle time and at recert time. Currently, a community score for ECs is tied to your review at cycle time. At annual recertification time, it's just a courtesy review where we provide feedback on which ECs were good and which ones needed to be corrected by the community's next cycle verification. ECs must meet the 90% correctness threshold at cycle time, but not at recert time because it's just a courtesy review. The Class 9 prerequisite is evaluated at cycle time, not at recert time because, again, it's just a courtesy review. During cycle time, you're given up to 3 chances to achieve that 90% correctness rate, meaning that we do 3 reviews of your ECs until you reach that 90%. And at recert time, it was only 1 review. It's just a courtesy review. Here's any changes or any problems that you had with your ECs. Go fix them. And then lastly, for all reviews that we do currently, cycle or recertification, we look at all your ECs up to 70. And if a community had more than 70 ECs that are submitted, we just take a random sample of 70 to get a good cross-section of ECs and to keep that sample statistically sound and not to create a terrible workload burden on us with some large communities that have a lot of ECs. Under the 2021 addendum, the system will be a bit different. The biggest change is that ECs will only be reviewed annually at each community's recertification date. This means that even when you are undergoing a cycle verification in a given year, your ECs will still be reviewed annually, but will be evaluated separately from your cycle verification since they're not evaluated for scoring anymore. So you can see by the table that the ECs are only evaluated through the lens of an annual review and essentially reviewed to make sure the Class 9 prerequisite is met. Got to meet the 90%, and you got to turn them in annually. Each year that when you submit your permit list in ECs, you will only be given 2 chances to achieve that 90% correctness rate. And the reason we went from 3 down to 2 is because if you're going to be doing them annually, they should be done more often You should be checking them more thoroughly. So we don't believe you're going to be needing the 3 reviews. You should be. It's a point that we're making here with the CRS program that, hey, look, these ECs need to be correct. You need to look at them as soon as they come in, review them immediately, and make sure they're correct. That way, when you submit them for CRS, maybe you don't even need the 2 reviews. At least 90% of them are correct the first time you submit them. But we will be giving you 2 chances. So like 1 chance to turn them in and 1 chance to correct, and then you can turn them in again, and hopefully they'll meet the 90% by then. We are also going to review all of the ECs going forward, starting in 2021. Like I mentioned before, right now we limit it to 70. We review all of them up to 70 and take like a statistical sample. We're going to bump that number up to a larger number, like maybe 300 or so. Review all of it. Anything more than 300, we looked at all the numbers of ECs we received over the years, and it'll be a very small handful of communities that turn in more than 300 per year. So we'll be getting almost 100% of all ECs reviewed for CRS communities every year. Granted, there are some large communities that may turn in a couple thousand. 300 is still a statistical sample, still more than a statistical sample for 1,000 or more ECs. So that's why we're going to that. But then lastly, you'll see that there's one thing that is going to be reviewed at cycle time, and that's that CCMP, or Construction Certificate Procedures. Since those are what's being scored, they need to be done at cycle time. So those are every 3 or 5 years. You need to make sure your procedures are updated and written, while everything else is handled annually. The changes I've been talking about will impact everyone involved in the CRS program, from communities to ISO, FEMA, and the CRS program as a whole. So let's first look how this is going to affect communities. And then I'll talk about how we're going to transition into this new system. All right, so the first thing that a community will notice is that the reporting period for permit lists and ECs will be much easier now. Once you've transitioned to this new system, the reporting period will always be based on your recertification date. So it's going to be year to year to year to year to year going forward. That makes it much easier than the way we've had it in the past. All right, there'll only be 2 chances to reach that 90%, so heads up with that. This will lead, because there's an annual review, this will lead to more timely corrections and maybe easier corrections for the communities. Right now, you didn't have to have them corrected until cycle time. You might wait 3, 4, or 5 years to do the corrections on those ECs. It's very difficult that many years down the road to get corrections done. So this will lead to more timely corrections, and hopefully they're easier for you. You'll have to create some more detailed procedures than what we are asking for currently. All communities that are staying in the program will receive 38 points, and there'll be no EC work with the cycle. So take a nice deep breath and know that, hey, no more ECs with the cycle and worrying about whether you get those and going forward with your cycle and all that kind of stuff. It's separated. It'll be taken out, and you can focus just directly on your other activities for your cycle. So let's talk about transitioning to the new system. A very important issue for everyone is how we're going to transition. 2021 is a transition year for this, and fundamentally will be the confusing year. Some year has to be. So we've tried to make this as simple as we could so that once 2021 is over, every year from there on is very simple to understand what's needed for submittal, and the baseline for your reporting periods will then be set. So we have 4 basic possible situations a community may find themselves in. Number 1, you're scheduled for a cycle in 2021. And if you're not scheduled for a cycle in 2021, that means you're probably recertifying. Those 2 are the largest percentage of CRS communities. But number 3 and number 4 here, kind of these 2 grouped together, you very well may find yourself either in an open cycle that was started prior to 2021, that has drug on into 2021, or you just recently closed out of a cycle, and so you're really not ready to recertify yet because you just came on a cycle. So those are the 4 basic situations you're going to find yourself in, a community could find themselves in. So we can take 3 of them and clump them together. And know that in these 3 situations, whether you are going to cycle at some point in the year 2021, you're currently in an open cycle that might have drug on since the end of 2020, or you recently closed your cycle, you are only going to be required to submit your permit list and ECs at your recertification date in 2021. You may have just closed out your cycle verification a month before your recert date arrives, or you may have just submitted your ECs with your cycle verification that, like I said, that started maybe, say, November of 2020. That's okay. At your recertification date, we will just ask for any of those ECs that you've had since your last submittal of ECs, whether it was from your last recertification or whether it was from your cycle. This may be very simple for some communities, as they would report none. You may have had, it's so close to each other, your recertification date to when you last submitted your ECs for a cycle or for your previous recertification, you may have none. Very simple, no problem, we have none. Or it may be a little bit more cumbersome for others, thinking that their cycle is just wrapped up, but now they need to submit ECs again. But remember, 1 year has to be a little tough, right, and awkward. And it's much easier now to start your reporting period on your recert date than waiting until your next true recertification, whenever that could be, if you're in the middle of a cycle or just wrapping one up. But no worries, your resource specialist will notify you plenty of time ahead of your due date, which is we usually notify everyone at least 45 days ahead of time, and we'll be communicating to you clearly what your requirement is. And then the 4th scenario was very easy. Say this is a year that's just your regular recertification year, so you're recertifying this year. That's simple. You're just going to go through a full recertification, which includes all the documentation that you're required to submit with your recertification, which is your permit list and your ECs as well, with everything else. Maybe we can look at it in a different way to think about it, come at it kind of backwards. All communities will submit ECs next year. At the recert date, and it's just going to be a decision of whether it'll be a full recertification next year or whether it's just your permit list and ECs by themselves. And again, you'll be notified well in advance, 45 days prior to your recertification date as to what's going to be required of you. And at any time, if you need to know what's required, you can always contact your CRS specialist, your CRS resource specialist for that information. Again, the basics to remember are starting in 2021, you'll be required to submit your permit list and ECs every year from there on at your recert date, at your recert time. A full recertification will still continue to be run the way we normally do and decide when communities fully recertify. But again, you'll be notified. For ISO and the EC review team, this will definitely lead to an increased workload. We're projecting a minimum of at least 20,000 ECs that we're going to process annually under this new system, so it's going to be quite a bit of work for us. We currently, last year we processed about 15,000, so this is going to be 20,000 plus, we think, going to come in every year. We will have established a Class 9 prerequisite for 90% correction was met or not met prior to your cycle verification each time. So that'll help streamline your cycle process, and we're going to be providing increased training for communities. For FEMA and the program as a whole, this will mean more timely verification of ECs, since it will be done annually instead of every 3 or 5 years. This should lead to more timely corrections, and which would mean better ECs, and hopefully those ECs are being corrected before the insurance policy is written, which is when it really makes the most sense and the most importance. And then hopefully that leads to better insurance ratings. Even with risk rating 2.0 looming on the horizon, we still believe an accurate EC will play a part in the rating of insurance policies. This will also help you catch non-compliance a bit quicker, right? If you're reviewing them more often and maybe more thoroughly, you're going to find some non-compliance that might squeak by. And lastly, yeah, this may lead to some communities being removed from the program if they can't hit that 90% on 2 chances. And that's okay. It's not designed to retrograde everybody, but it's designed to make this activity more difficult and better. Elevation certificates are very important, both for insurance rating and for NFIP compliance. And thus, having an organized and effective EC review process is critical in your community. And it shows that you're the leader in floodplain management and you're able to provide those insurance discounts for your residents, being part of the CRS program. So they're very important. Want everybody to take it seriously. Now that you've seen everything that you have to do, let's talk about how you need to prepare for this, as soon as you can, and try not to wait too much longer here. So the first thing you'll want to do is sit down, right, and go through your internal permitting process and think about how the collection and review of ECs and all the other required certificates are handled in your office. Get everyone on board with on how the process is working or going to work if you're going to change anything from your current process, and write those procedures down. This helps you currently as you process certificates and have to remember who does what and when and all that kind of stuff. And it helps if you happen to leave or anybody in the review process happens to leave and you have to replace with a new staff member. It's a nice written procedure right there in place they can read and understand, and everyone remembers exactly how we do it. You'll then need to review the ECs. Actually review them. We kind of believe there may be communities here and there that do not, really fully review the ECs very well. Now that you got your procedures created, think about your whole permitting process and where that all comes into play, now you need to make sure you're actually doing the review. Doing the review means that you actually have to know what a correct EC looks like. You have to know what's an error on it. Then you need to know how to actually correct that error. Do you have to send it back to the surveyor? Do they need to do it? Can you do it as a floodplain manager in your community in Section G at the very end? We hope to provide some training throughout the end of the year here to help communities with that. We do currently have an EC checklist that's on our website that you can look through that shows all the fields that we look at and that we evaluate for correctness when we review your ECs. Those are the fields that are important for either insurance purposes or for compliance purposes. So that's why CRS looks at those. So you need to make sure you get up to speed on errors and how a correct EC looks, how to correct them. And then I think a really important thing that maybe not all communities do, make sure you make an accurate EC required in your permitting process. Make it a requirement before you finalize a permit, before you give that certificate of occupancy. You can just, if you tell the surveyor the errors right away, as soon as they turn in that EC, you're more likely to get them changed. You're more likely to get the surveyor to correct that form than months or years later. Hold that over their head as much as you can before you finalize a permit. That gives you a little bit of a chance to make sure it's correct. That gets us to the end. Thanks for attending and for watching the webinar. If you have any questions on the new process or what's required of you at your next recertification, you can always contact your CRS specialist or your resource specialist. You can find their contact information on our website there. Go to the 100 Series tab and scroll down and find the name of who you're looking for, whether a resource specialist or your CRS specialist, and we should be good. I'd like to thank everyone again for attending today. We will have more training on ECs by the end of the year. Keep checking back to our website to look at those under the training tab. Check our newsletter every time it comes out. We will have more information on these changes in the newsletter. We will publicize when we have this template ready for everyone to use for the procedures, training videos that go up on our website. Trying to let everyone know as soon as we have something prepared, and we're trying to get everything prepared as far ahead of 2021 as we possibly can